Hello, thank you for joining us today. My name is Megan McKelvey, and I'm the Vice President of Customer Engagement at Brightfind. For those of you who are meeting Brightfind for the first time today, we are a specialized digital design and web development company helping organizations transform their websites for more than 20 years. Before we begin, just a couple quick housekeeping items. We will be recording today's webinar, and we will send it your way after the event so that you've got the slides to refer back to. If you have any questions as we go along today, please use the Q&A feature that's within the program, and we'll answer those questions at the end of the presentation. We are so excited to have you with us today and to have the opportunity to share this content intelligence product. This is one of the biggest game changers that we've seen in our space in quite some time. The product builds upon data that you receive from Google Analytics, but it uniquely focuses on topical-based engagement. It truly is a marketer's dream. The content analysis tool was recently acquired by our partners at Episerver, but it will remain available for use on any content management system. So I know we've got a number of folks with a lot of different CMSs that are joining us today, and we're thrilled to be able to offer this product across CMS systems. I'm pleased to introduce today our presenter, Jeff Cheel. Jeff is the Senior Director of Customer Strategy at Epi and perhaps our favorite strategist to work with. Jeff, I'll turn it over to you. Let's dive in.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the audience today to talk through this really great suite. I am from Episerver. We acquired this solution back in November. And have been working with the content intelligence and recommendations team since to produce a really rich, diverse product that helps out key verticals like associations and nonprofits. And going through today, we're going to review the product suite. What is it? What can it do for you? How does it work? Go through the nuts and bolts and talk a little bit from a technical side about how it's applied and what kind of information it's grabbing. We're going to see it in action. We're going to do a demonstration with an association where we can go through data a little bit and do an audit. We're going to talk about what if you want to get a hold of it, how can you access it, and how, what is it going to take to do so, and then what if you have questions? Leave some time at the end, and if you do have questions, post them in the chat, and we'll try to answer them as we go. We really wanted to capture a tool that does some key things for organizations that we've heard in the market, and really big pain points and really points that we're trying to constantly optimize. We start with increasing engagement at a one-to-one level. Key organizations say, I want to get the right content to the right person at the right time, and so they have large repositories of content. There's always a struggle to try to get and choose the right piece for the right person. How do we make that a persona of one? How do we drive that personalization to the needs of an individual to be able to move them through our funnel? Also driving incremental conversions. Our sites are driving to goals. They're trying to produce some kind of desired results. And so the idea of using content or using parts of our site to increase those conversions will always be key. And if we can drive the right content to the right person, we'll continue to do so. And then finally, saving hundreds of hours. We know there's a lot of time to go through many pieces of content that are created by your organizations to identify the right piece for the right person. And how do we map that to content? What if we could save our time by utilizing a machine that drives that conversion? So with our tool today, we hit these three notes consistently for organizations, and we'd like to show you how we can do it for you. And we're going to take a top-level view at the technology itself. Again, we are AI-powered one-to-one marketing. And we start in the platform by collecting up your data. Tags are applied in much the same way that Google Analytics applies tags. We give you a tag to put on the header of your pages. And when a live user hits a piece of content on your site, that piece of content is processed into our database. In doing so, the system will use natural language processing to look at the HTML within your page and identify key topics in order to ingest. Now, the topics then form a word cloud, and we give a point system to each topic depending on where it sits. A topic in your header is going to be viewed as much more popular or valuable than something in your footer, for example. Now, these topics are not just words. We're not looking at single phrases and trying to match word to word. We're giving definition to those topics, and that's because our system contains 25 million topics that we have predefined. In doing so, when those phrases are identified, we're now giving a definition to those words. And so when we're doing comparisons, we're not just trying to find other words, we're actually finding key categories, trying to compare those together too. Now, the system will then know the difference between Apple, the fruit, and Apple, the technology platform. So it does know context based on capitalization and preference in the space. We're also multilingual. We have 25 different languages that we collect that are global. So if you have multilingual content on your site, it can be processed all together. We collect those phrases, we process them into English, we compare in a single language, and then compare back. So we can take care of multilingual content for you. All new content posted to your system will automatically be collected as well. And we're using live traffic in order to process that content. So very little need for developers to start collecting the content. The second phase is starting to look at users as they come to the site. When I hit the site, a word cloud is created for me based on the words that I ingest and the content that I interact with. And in doing so, I start to build what we call a buyer's interest profile or a purchase intent profile. Now, in many associations, there's not as much buyer intent or purchase intent, it's more conversion intent. And so for that case, we start to see what the trends are for an individual about what they're looking at and how they're interacting. And with that, my word cloud will continue to grow as I interact with more content over time. Now, even more, we can program in those goals into the system by identifying key actions like completing a form or visiting a piece of content that I want a user to do. And in doing so, we can then isolate those events, report on those within our data intelligence, and also start to identify pieces of content that typically drive to a conversion through analytics and through reporting. So it's giving a better picture overall about the goals and how they're interacting with our system. Now then, the system will always be thinking about the next best piece of content for the user. Now, if you see up on screen, I might have somebody looking at analytics who might then look at deep learning and other related content. So as it's constantly thinking about the next thing to show, we can then deliver those recommendations to different points within your system. And we are not limited to just the web. This can be done via email or via third channel, and I can show you a few examples here in a minute. But basically any touch point where you want recommendations to be shown, the system can then be calculated to do so. Now we're going to focus a lot on the intelligence suite today, but do note that the intelligence is the bedrock for a lot of our users to start going into recommendations. So though we will kind of talk about it today, those are kind of a point A and then a point B as part of your experience. But the reason we come here today is to talk mostly about the engagement metrics and the intelligence that we collect on the platform. Primarily talking to the typical marketer that says, I need a better view of my platform, but I need it within the context of my content. I need to know how that content is performing, what is performing better than others and why. And if we could give that dimension of data that maybe goes above and beyond what Google Analytics brings for bounce rates and general site trends and gets down to the individual and what they're interacting with, it gives our marketing team tenfold the amount of data and depth in order to start making critical decisions. Now, once this tool is implemented, we can then implement it across multiple channels. One of the main channels that we deliver across is web personalization. And again, like Megan had pointed out, we are not limited to a single CMS. Our injection method allows us to implement this product on any CMS. As well, it can be done via email personalization. Now, we are slightly more limited on email personalization because of our stitching and our technology path, but we plan on including other platforms like AMSs in the future as we grow this out for your own personal needs, like an act or another tool, which would allow you the ability to then embed content recommendations within the emails that you send on those platforms. Other methods could be retargeting. We've done connections with Google Ads or AdRoll in the past for acquisition. Now, not maybe a big tactic for a lot of people on the call today, but do note that we can then drive dynamic content within the ads that we send out for users. As well, guided selling, a Conversica, an Intercom, a Drift, maybe a little bit more ABM approach, but plugging this data into that kind of flow in order to empower our salespeople or our converters to know. And then demand analytics, large data platforms, Tableau, Domo, Power BI, the ability to get a hold of this rich data that's being collected and pass it into a larger data set for analytics. And then finally, sales intelligence, the ability to plug this right into your CRM. We've seen users go as far as mapping the word clouds for an individual to the user within, in this case, the CRM, but no reason why in the future, your AMS. And imagine if I could pull up a member and see not only the content that they've interacted with in the past, but a word cloud about them, the value that we could bring to the table there. Now, we've heard what our customers wanted. We've talked to them. This is the reason we delivered this product. And our customers consistently say, you know, how much content do I have for each topic? You know, what is my reporting telling me about the volume of content that I have for each keyword within the system? What should I write about next? What is the next best thing that's going to drive content and drive engagement on my site? And then what content drives KPIs and results? And if you can relate to one of these questions, I'm going to show you today how to get that out of the data and get that out of the dashboard. So let's see it in action, and we'll start to kind of show a little bit more of an explanation. So I'm going to start today by utilizing a site society for the manufacturing engineers, SME. They built the site and implemented this tool on their site. As a metric, they had continued to struggle in the past to drive the right content to right users and give metrics on conversion and success. And so they identified a lot of these key points within their site, like the latest news and resources, and this kind of plethora of content that they were driving as a need in order to dynamically drive these sections to try to increase conversion and increase interaction on the site. So in doing so, we were able to implement the tool, and upon implementation, we went through all of their content, ingested it, and started to look article by article and piece by piece. Now, if I view this piece of content, I have a tool that we're going to use for demo's sake that shows me the actual pieces of information that we're collecting on the page. So for example, when the page loads, we ingest the content into our system, and then we create the word cloud on the fly. And we can see the word cloud here and the different topics that are pulled from the HTML within the content. Now, our system can be taught. Obviously, ISM or other associations, that might be a topic that we know will appear within our content. So it's not as dynamic or interesting to us, and we can actually have the system ignore that topic if we choose to. As well, we could ignore other main topics like manufacturing or conference call in this case. The system is trying to give as much relevancy as possible, but we get to teach it and tell it what terms we should really focus in on. As well, we're capturing the metadata from the pages. So we are looking at any kind of metadata that's being collected. And the value of that metadata is going to be multiple fold. It's going to allow us to help with segmentation. It's going to allow us to help with scripting and different tools we're going to build in the future. But it also helps us down the road when we start to think about the ways that we would use this for recommendations to our customers. All right, so this process is then translated into a dashboard that we then allow marketers to see. We can allow content creators, anybody who's needed. And we'll go through this dashboard a little bit, referring back to the site to show you how the dots are connected. So within the dashboard, when tags are applied, we immediately start ingesting content. And we can immediately get a report back to myself, or I can share this with somebody in my association about the number of content items that we collect. Now, it typically takes about 3 to 5 days for us to ingest all content on a site. And that's typically because within 3 to 5 days, the majority of your content should be viewed. If you have a large repository of content, there is methods in order to auto scrape your site, to go through to find all those content pieces that might not be getting a lot of traffic. As well, we don't have to do this just on one domain. We can actually add multiple domains. So let's say you have a subsite or a separate domain for content. You can apply those same tags to multiple places in order to grab that content together. So if we're looking at your ecosystem, we can, and then we can either filter on a particular source, or we can filter out a particular source. If your marketing platform is separate from your webinar platform, for example, we can look and compare and see those as well. Now, in ingesting content, it will immediately give me a report back on the topics that the system is picking up. In this case, over the last month, the system has picked up 67 pieces of content. Now, that means that 67 pieces of content were either viewed for the first time, or they were added, and then a user saw them for the first time. So if those pages are public, then we make them available and we'll ingest them. There is a method for approval that we'll review here in a few minutes that would allow you to restrict certain content to be used until you choose to. So don't feel like it jumps into the bucket and then immediately gets thrown to the masses. Now, this is also telling me that across those 67 pieces of content, we've collected 2,800 topics with an average of 77 topics per content item. These articles are well optimized for SEO, so we're collecting up a lot of topics. And I think the value of the number of topics will highly depend on that text. And I think a lot of feedback that this system can give is, how many kind of SEO optimized terms are being picked up off our pages. And if we're not seeing a high number of topics, that could reflect either the way that our pages are built or the type of terms that we're choosing to use. So an immediate feedback to your team about the value, as our scraping tool is very similar to an SEO washer or an SEO optimization tool. Now, it then gives a list of topics, and we can see these topics, manufacturing being number one. The system is telling me that 68% of content pieces that were collected over this period of time contain the word manufacturing. Now, if I wanted to click on this term, I could go deeper into it. So I could look at its definition. We have a few different tracking methods for how content is created. It's telling me that the web page tracking is where most of my content is being pulled. And then I can get a description of this term. So I can get back to me what the system is defining manufacturing as. This becomes much more handy when the topics become much more obscure or much more direct, to know that we are defining it in the same way that you're defining it. And we're pulling the majority of those definitions from Wikipedia, and we're constantly updating the system to include more terms and be more diverse. Now, once I'm here, I can take a few actions. I can view content. This would give me a list of all articles or all pieces of content where this topic appears. Also, I can take an action on this topic. Let's say my team decided that this is a good piece of information for me, but we just don't necessarily want to know or be told that manufacturing is in all pieces of content. And if that's the case, I can hide the topic, which will then hide it from my dashboards, but still factor it into personalization. Or I can move it to bin. And moving it to bin actually just ignores it altogether. So it doesn't delete it or doesn't affect the CMS at all. It simply removes it from our consideration within the analytics platform to make it smarter. We see a lot of customers audit this list up front in order to ignore or kind of focus in, because as we're looking at our content list, the value, sure, will come from your top 5, but the majority of value is derived from your middle 5 or your second 20, and knowing in that middle range where those kind of deeper topics appear and how often they appear for your users. Now, a point that I wanted to make here, we are not limited to just URLs. We can ingest external data sources like PDF repositories. We need a PDF associated to a URL for downloading. And as long as we have a unique value for each piece of content, we can do that. We can scan in that content. We see a lot of our users trying to pull in external repositories to do so. We haven't gotten questions about videos in the past. We can, but the video must have a script, and that script must be on the page where we ingest it. So if you have a question about content types and are worried about the ability to add those to the system, just reach out to us. We could talk about how to get that through. Now, within this dashboard, I have a few other views. My sources, again, we can divide this up by domain and where we're collecting data. We also have a concept of sections. And sections are an ability for us to take our complete content and divide it up into smaller buckets. I know as well as everybody else that all your content is not created equal. And if I look back at SME, some of the value of their content might be slightly different. My membership content is going to be very different than my education content, especially in the way that I think about it. I want it reported on, and especially I want the ability to deliver it to my customers. Now, sections are built by you, the marketer, and you, the manager. We give support on the customer side from a customer success standpoint in helping you build these sections. But imagine I can build a section for any kind of grouping of content that I would like. Now, in this case, they've identified news and resources as a way or kind of a piece that they'd like to drive. And this comes from these related articles that they drive on their pages. So in doing so, they have created a section. They've given the section a name, and they've associated a flow to it. A section is just a bucket of content. We build a flow in order to assign pieces of content to that section. Now, if I look at the associated flow, we have some pretty diverse rules here. We'll start at the top. First, what I'm defining is that my source is coming from the SME.org site. I'm then looking at the article and deciding if the original URL contains the word technologies, then I put that piece of content into the bucket. I've then built some verification steps, and these are to say that if the Open Graph tagged image is not empty, we include it. This allows me to then ignore any articles where we forgot to put an image or forgot to put a title and description for the sake of recommendations. They've also decided to do if the original URL contains 2019 in order to make sure that we're staying relevant. However, date is something, or publish date is something we collect within the article level. So that date range could be put in at the article level rather than the rule here. Now you see they've not only done and or rules, so they have a way to stack those together, but also know that once we get into more diverse rules, we can use a lot more kind of diverse values. Like we could search for a certain topic within our articles, we can look for a main image, an imported date, etc. And I see a popular use for this right now is to maybe look at my content. And in doing so, when looking at my content, maybe I'd like to look for a keyword. So in looking at content, maybe I contain the word COVID, and I'd be able to identify all content where COVID was used or the word COVID was used. So that might be a value to me. Now we're going to see more value in these sections as we go, but just identify that we'll be able to collect them. Now these are not one-time filters. If we build a flow, new content that gets added to the system will populate into those flows. So we don't need to constantly update or constantly build. It's done on the fly and reprocessing as we go. Now, once a piece of content follows these rules, we can take a few actions. We can approve the article, or we can move it to bin. And I see a lot of people have built rules in the past where there's a selection of articles that they'd like to ignore because they're, question and answer, FAQ articles or whatever. So they would build a rule to ignore those articles. When we say bin, we're not trashing the article in the CMS. We're just removing the profile within our system so that we're not considering it. We can then add it to a section, and we see those sections here. And then we can take an option to add that content as we go in real time. Now, a question from the board asks, and Evan asks, is this system tailored to work with a custom taxonomy? Absolutely, and it depends on how that taxonomy is reflected to your system, Evan. If the taxonomy comes within the URL, then absolutely, we search for the value. If you have a category that you assign to your articles, you would make that category or specific attribution a metadata tag, and then we could sort as such. We have a customer who does early stage funnel content as opposed to late stage funnel content for sales. And they add that as a descriptor or a hidden metadata field, and then we can sort that by metadata value as we pull it. Now, this gives us a good chance to go back into the content list and check out a content profile for everybody. When a content piece is collected into the system, it's processed into our queue. And we can see that we have a current content queue, a processing queue, and then what we call a bin. Now, again, to reflect back, a piece of content can be live or it can be trashed. Again, we're not trashing it from your CMS, we're just ignoring it. So for any reason, if this piece of content came in and we wanted to ignore it, we could move it to bin. We don't delete it forever. There's a holding queue. We can see it here. And if we want to return it, we can. Now, in order to do so, this article is then set to unapproved. So to go with the ability to bin an article, we have a sense of approved and unapproved. Now, this could work for any sense within your organization. If there's an idea that an article would have to be approved in some case before it's shared for recommendations, you could build a rule to approve. I've also seen certain customers who publish content before they make it public to all end users. So they would build an approval cycle to make sure that new content is not yet shown to the end user before it's shared. It requires an audit within the system here, but it's definitely possible to do so. Now, if I've processed a piece of content, I can click on that content profile and review the attributes that are collected about it. This gives me the chance to make sure the system is working correctly. I can see exactly the thought process and be able to collect. Now we can see key values, like for example, the title that we pulled here, this is coming from your Open Graph title. We don't find an Open Graph title, the system will try to choose one for you by looking at your H1 or any other value. So in most cases, we'll depend on that Open Graph title in order to grab. As well, when we pull an image, we're not finding the first image on the page. This happens to be an Open Graph image. We know you have logos, Facebook logos, social media logos, et cetera. We don't want to grab the wrong image. So in that case, we would ask you to give us the Open Graph image, we make sure it's applied appropriately. Again, a lot of this is being built up for phase 2, which would be some sense of recommendations, but just know that's where those values come from. Now within this profile, I can see the import date, so that's not necessarily the creation date. You can see the source, the language, and then I get actually a feedback of the HTML that was pulled off the page. This shows me exactly what was captured from the page and how it was seen. I have plenty of customers who have pages built where they have a common footer, or they have a cookie statement that's embedded in the HTML. The system can be customized so that we don't scrape all words on the page. We can just focus on main words. And so if that means you have navigation elements that are skipped in order to pick up properly, we would build a custom scraping rule into the system to make sure that your data is being picked up properly. Now, as well, on a piece of content, we can look at its metadata in real time. So these are the values that we picked up, including author and category. Now, we don't have a benchmark or a minimum on the metadata that you include. The more metadata that you include, the more valuable it's going to be to your organization. So, add as much as you can. And most customers that we talk to already have a good system of values, but we're not requiring an Open Graph type or an Open Graph description. They can come in as they will. If you're using a non-standard value, it's just a custom metadata value. We would build it accordingly to be able to grab it. Now, as I'm looking at this piece of content, I can continue to look at the word cloud. I can actually make this a list view and see the relevancy score. So on each term, we give it a score, again, based on where that topic appears on the page, about how we read it, and so on. The system is as smart as it can be. You do have the chance to work with us to make sure that certain topics are appearing properly. And again, and if I needed to, ignore topics as they appear to if they're either misread for any reason or kind of pulled to myself. Also, a value that's misread within the system might actually show you that SEO systems out there in the world might be misreading your topics too. So just the fact of our scan and using NLP might send up a red flag to your team to let them know that maybe topics aren't being picked up as you think. Now, as well, I can edit this profile. I can go in and modify it. Now, this allows me then to look at what values have come in to make page level changes. Now, we obviously don't think you'll go through the thousands of pieces of content that you have in order to audit that system to make sure that all your values are correct. However, this does give you the chance at a page level, if there's a certain topic that you'd like to add, for example, or remove, without having to change the bigger system. So going in and doing one at a time might be pretty valuable to you. As well, it could point out additional values that we're not currently collecting. SME has not taken advantage of the idea of adding a published date yet. But if they did, I'd be able to then filter by published date down the road, either in my reporting or when I start to do recommendations. All right, so the system has collected all the content, has put it into categories. We obviously immediately tag certain pieces of content based on the sections that we create and be able to put them in. Now, with all that said, once I have my sections built and I have my flows built and I have my content processed, now it's time to get into the intelligence suite and to really look at the data that we can derive from this system. So our insight dashboard is really where the rubber hits the road. This is your overall view of your site, reflecting your interactions and your uniques to your site, depending on new dimensions of data that you might not have been able to collect before. In SME's case, we see that over the last month, they've gotten 25,000 uniques across 35,000 interactions, with an average of 1.38 interaction per unique visitor. And we can see that by day, charted out for ourselves. We can change this time frame. I can also compare. I have a last month that I'm collecting. If I choose to then compare it, it will give me the previous month compared to the current month. And so by clicking this button, it's going to add a few more lines to show me day by day over the same time frame exactly how my page and content is spiked. So in this case, this is saying that there was a previous period where we had a huge spike on a certain day, and we could try to reflect back on how that happened. But we can see, so very interestingly enough, that there's an opposite correlation between the last 30 days for this particular site. Now, above and beyond just looking at general traffic trends, we can then dive into these interactions by the topic that people are interacting with. So rather than just looking at bounce rates and page views, now we can look at interactions by what content that the user is interested in or showing interest in. For example, if I look at here, I can see that 53% of my users look at content where the word machine is used. 47% are looking at content where the word solution is used. And we can start to break down these words as we go. As well, I can see a score over here on the right where the system is deriving the typical number of pages or interactions that a user has when they see a particular topic. Like, for example, I could grab, and let me grab a few more topics here to see. I can look at something like redox as a term. It appears in a pretty good number of content pieces. 40% of my users look at that word. However, typically a user only looks at 1.27 pages or pieces of content when they look at that term, as opposed to application software where we see a slightly higher score, or even solution where we see an even higher score. So we're starting to give a numeric value of interaction to the topics that we see. Now, as well, the data doesn't stop just at topics. We expand out into content. We should know the individual URLs where we're getting that interaction. And so I can look at my whole site-wide and know that my content came 2.68% of the time to the most 20 influential professors in smart manufacturing. Now, as well, if I've created sections within my site, I can then isolate on certain buckets of content. Maybe we don't want all the white noise of people who go to my About Me page. If I just want to look at a certain section, I can filter on that section. It will then look at all users who ended up visiting that part of the site, and then it will give me a breakdown on, again, page views as well as topics. But the data gets even better. After we've divided this down, we then go even deeper into the attribution. We break out refers. We can break out referring campaign. If you guys have added a UTM code to your users, we pick up that UTM code and catalog it here. We pick up referring mediums. We know social compared to email, compared to Elevate, and so on. We know referring sources, Facebook, distribution list, social, etc. Now, these filters are awesome, as well as our ability to stack them on top of each other. So as I'm looking at my content and users that have just visited my news and resource section, what if I wanted to isolate that group by people who were referred from Google, or remove people who were referred from Google, and know that if I wanted to look at more organic traffic? Or let's take a more functional standpoint here. What if I wanted to isolate, and let's remove our section here, for our marketing team on a particular UTM code? And I wanted to say, let's look at all users who came in from my organic social media publishing campaign. Even though they're not high, there's only 38 users, this still gives me a view of what pages they went to and how they went. And I can immediately defer that my social media campaign to drive to this page created a lot of touch sessions with a lot of bounces, and probably gives back to my team that our social media campaign is not driving enough repeat interaction, not keeping people on the page and getting them to continue to interact. So that immediate point back to my team is saying we need to improve the flow or the relevancy on this page to get people to see more. Now, in some cases, this can parrot back to you what you might already know. You get a lot of feedback that says, well, great, Jeff, I know that 20 influential professors is a piece that we published or promoted in a lot of verticals, whether that's email or something else. Well, then I can exclude this piece of content. And once I get past my top performer, maybe that allows me to take a more organic look at my users based on the data that we're seeing. So it allows you to sort out those outliers to make sure that you're focusing in on the data points that are relevant to you. All right, so as we continue, again, we can focus in and add filters to each other as they go, depending on what we see. So we have the ability to divide and go. Once we get to a certain section, we can then also look at the profiles of the users that we collect. And I can click on that profile and I'm able to see the individual user. Some quick points here. I can whitelist out internal users. If you have them, we can blacklist those or whitelist those so we're not getting overwhelming traffic. Also within the profile, we are inherently GDPR compliant. We're not collecting any PII data out of the box. However, once you buy the tool, if you choose to add additional identifiers, such as a Marketo ID or a Personify ID, you can. And that would be an extra identifier that we collect within the tracking payload that would help you connect back to the user. A lot of people ask, what's the value in maybe adding an email address to this profile? Absolutely, and that would allow you to stitch at some point. So there's considerations to what data you choose to include. But to that point, that then gets back into your privacy policy for you to reflect back to your users. Now this profile will show me when the profile was created, how many interactions they have. And if I start to collect conversions, which again, SME is not in this case, we would see those conversions cataloged on the page, and it would come as an event. And by the end of the presentation today, I'll give you a quick view about what a conversion looks like on a page. My interest profile is collected for the user. So this is a representation of all the content that this particular user has seen and how they've interacted with that content over time. And then I get a timeline, and I'm shown page by page and piece by piece. So on Tuesday the 30th, I can see a timestamp with what pages they went to, as well as I can see the recommendations. So on Wednesday, July 19th, they view blocks and recommendations, and we're able to compare. And I can see a flow if they click from one to another, so I can get an accurate timeline about how people are moving through my system. This becomes even more beneficial the more nuanced my group gets. And if I wanted to look specifically at an acquisition campaign where we pulled COVID medical devices content, we have 5 users, I can then really focus in on those 5 users, figure out how they were acquired, look at their flow and how they move through the site in order to verify. All right, so my profiles can be dynamic, they can be used. We get a lot of questions about exporting profiles. That's absolutely possible if you wanted to bring it into your own data set or use aspects of the data for your own use. So definitely consider that a possibility depending on your action, but always talk to us about how you might envision using this data for your own use, and we can tell you whether it's out of the box or customized. Now, as well, I can dive even deeper into the data. So this is my overview, my 1,000-foot view. We have 2 other reports that we can show. One is topic performance. Topic performance is a comparison between unique visitors that look at your content comparing to the number of pieces of content where a topic appears. Now, right now, this is looking at the complete site for SME, and it's giving me dot by dot where my topics fit. Now, in this case, it's saying that COVID-19 has a pretty high number of uniques in comparison, but we don't actually use it in that many places. So that's telling me as a content administrator, there's an interest in this article or in this piece of content that I should use more. And corollary, maybe redox is used a particularly high amount of times from a unique perspective, but not necessarily seen for volume. And this line is going up on this perfect match between times that we use a word and when people see it. As we use it more people should ingest it. Now, this gets even more relevant as we dive into our content even more. So we look at news and resources, and we can apply. And in that case, then we're taking a smaller look just at my news and resources articles and trying to see the same slice. Now, I can focus in on certain topics. I can remind myself of them. I can save this or export this for another user. I can look at this over a period of time, maybe as we post content to see how these words appear. And then I can even focus in on certain topics to eliminate the white noise. So this allows me to take a critical look at our content across some filters or some lenses that we might be applying to it to see its effect and to see how it relates. Now, if anybody is asking the little icons next to each of our topics, we use a categorization system when we place a topic. If it's uncategorized, we don't have a grouping for it. If it's a concept, we put it into its own grouping. This helps us when doing our definitions and helps us when sorting certain topics, et cetera. So that's an internal system for us. Now, we can also then clear this and start to use topics that are furthest from the line, for example, and try to drive these point by point. So it allows us to help a little bit better kind of filtering on the fly so that we can start to see our value. Now, the last report, and I think probably one of the best and one that will resonate with a lot of people on the phone call here today, is my content utilization report. Companies struggle to look at their content critically and know how much of my content is actually being interacted with and what of that content has value. If I'm producing 1,000 pieces of content, do all of those pieces get interactions? Our system takes a critical look at your content and it gives a score. If it is over 0.1% interaction based on your total, it views that piece of content as being interacted with. Now, the fact that it's identified means that it has at least one page view. But in this case, this is saying that on SME, 22% of their content had little to zero interactions. So once it was viewed once, it was never viewed again. So an interesting take to my company to know 22% of those pieces of content that I've spent time to create never got any page views. Now, on the flip side, this is saying that 77% of my content was interacted with, but even better, it's giving me a line of delineation. And this might be a little hard to read, so I'll read it out. It's saying that in that 77% of content, 4.82% of my content accounts for 50% of my interactions. So a very small slice of my overall content is driving the majority of my page views. This gets even more interesting that I can click on the bars and be able to divide these out. If I start to see these pieces of content. Now, in this case, I can make this data smarter. I can look at content and say, you know what, I'd like to remove this top end. So let's go the 20, so I can find the 20 most influential pieces of smart marketing. I'm going to, does not include this particular piece. And if I apply, then we're taking off that top end, we're flattening out my curve. We're making it more relevant so I can get a better view. Now, additionally, in this case, maybe I can look at a particular section. Now, in SN's case, their section is still pretty broad, but as you could make a more refined section, I could isolate maybe by education and my e-learning classes, or I could educate another part. Now, in this case, in news and resources, they're getting a slightly higher ranking for the number of pieces that are interacted with, and they're getting a slightly larger section of content that's driving the majority of their interactions. But in doing so, we can focus down to the content team about those pieces that are constantly changing and get that feedback. So imagine what we've done today. To a content creator, I've given a full lens on the interaction to your content. I've given the value of your content by showing you its topic performances. So looking at the value of the words that you show. We also proved that we can show overall site interactions based on channel, based on referring source, and divide that data in a deeper way, especially with our ability to create sections in a way that's relevant to you, and a dynamic set of sections that can easily refine to your taxonomy and your needs in order to create a data and a lens. And with all that, that makes up a very strong, intelligent suite that's really going to drive value to organizations, applied through Google Tags in a way that most companies are familiar with, and quickly and efficiently in a way that a marketer can really ingest. And with that, Megan, I will ask if there's any questions.
There are a couple, Jeff. Thank you. This is so much fun. As a marketer, it's almost mind-boggling to think about all the things we can do and the way we can start to drive our content strategy. I know we've had a lot of fun using it at Brightfind. I know a lot of our clients are as well. I've sat through dozens of these with you now, and I learn something new every time. So thank you for taking the time to share all that. We do have a couple of questions that have come in. So the first one that I want to share, and as I'm pulling these up, if you have other questions, it's not too late. Please go ahead and throw them into the Q&A window, and we'll make sure that those get answered for you. So the first question that came in is, do I have a lot of work? Is there a lot of manual setup and tuning to make this work for me?
Yeah, that's a great question. So once tags are applied, everything is going to be ingested automatically. So getting the content in as a baseline or an MVP takes very little work, same amount of work that you apply to get Google Analytics in. Then there will be a lens or a gap between the standard data collection and what's relevant to you. I would say the majority of work is in creating sections that are relevant to your users. An audit of your topics are pretty important too, to make sure that you're ignoring topics or even articles that might be kind of white noise to the piece. We typically can run that through in a very short workshop, and then the data can start to aggregate. And so from a setup perspective, I would say low effort, understanding that there's some organizations that might require medium. Now, if there's any need to add additional metadata or modify your pages in any way, that might get into a medium or high level work, but in reality, value is derived from very low effort out of the box. There's just some optimization that can happen.
Fantastic, thank you. The next question that came in is, and I know you touched on this briefly, but can you talk a little bit more about how you'd integrate this with your AMS or your CRM?
Yeah, sure. So on the profile level, the first thing we want to do is make sure we grab an attribute about the user that we can stitch together. So in many cases, we will add in a CRM ID or some kind of identifier that allows us to compare those two together. That'll be added into the identifier section that we see here. For an example, we've used an Episerver device ID. This would allow us at some point, if we were using Episerver, to connect this to an Episerver device. But in this case, it could be any identifier that we pick off a cookie or we pick off another value. Then as we stitch that data together, whether it's done automatically in Idio by connecting content recommendations by doing recommendations, we stitch together with a script that compares those users together. In your case, if you're exporting the profiles, you would then find a user by a bespoke attribute that you add here in order to contain them together. So at a very basic level, let's say we're using this in Salesforce Marketing Cloud. When a Salesforce Marketing Cloud email is opened, the email address is then paired back to the identifiers that we see here to make sure we know that the users are the same, and that we pair that back together. So there's some very easy kind of all developer side and all done by the content recommendations team for you kind of steps. And then there's some more advanced steps that might be more advanced. I'll make in integrating with an AMS is the value here is I can apply this to multiple places. We know that you're going to have a CMS as well as a commerce tool that does your transactions. To be able to apply this to multiple domains and get that full journey, it's going to be big for you to be able to stitch that together.
That's huge for our clients, huge. What about, talk to us a little bit about the differences between this tool and Google Analytics. Why would clients want both?
Yeah, no, in many ways, you know, we never want to replace Google Analytics. However, I think there's dimensions within this tool that Google Analytics simply can't provide. For starters, GA is not providing the lens of topics. It's not using natural language processing to give relevancy to content. And that alone is really where a lot of our customers are struggling to get. They want to know how the words are affecting their content. What about the pieces that I create are driving relevancy? So that lens is really key. We've gotten feedback that our flow and our UX is a little bit more intuitive. Also, I really do think that our section building provides a lens and an ability to customize in a very quick, efficient way that some people struggle to do in GA for that case. The ability to look at individual profiles, the ability to modify very easily, the ability to stitch this and really create an end content is key. And I just don't think GA is providing a topic performance report and a content utilization report in the same way that we are too. Final point that I'll make is that both systems do collect goals. I think our goal collection, especially as it refers back to content and what content is driving to your goals, allows that extra lens that definitely is very beneficial to a lot of our customers.
Great.
Can I interject another comment about that?
Sure.
Sure.
So I think, you know, for our particular marketplace, the core differential between the two, the thing that really makes a difference and is so valuable, is that Google Analytics tells you what is happening. Like a user comes and they're going to this page and this page. It doesn't tell you why those things are happening. This tool tells you, at least from a topic perspective, it tells you the reason they're going to these pages is because they're interested in these topics. And that piece, that missing piece about the why, is what everybody struggles with Google Analytics. Okay, it tells me what, now I need to make a bunch of hypotheses about why. This actually answers the question, why they're going to those pages. That's a huge difference.
Yeah, and you know, I'll give one more chance. I know Sebastian is on the line as well. He's one of the founders of the company. Sebastian, do you have anything you'd like to add? Sorry to put you on the spot about situations in the past where you've talked to customers, the difference in the value and the data here compared to Google Analytics? Watch, I'm going to put him on the spot and he won't be available. But all right, well, regardless, I'll hear you.
He's coming off mute.
Yeah, so hi there. Yeah, so what I would say is one of the big differences for customers has been that ability to get to that individual interest profile. So really, as you're collating up all this topical data, it's great to know it about the page and the section, but then the other thing is I want to understand more about the individual members and what are my members interested in. And then, so how can I what they want to do is then is like understand how can I put that against my membership information or against that individual information. So now if I do things like, for example, if I want to personalize my content, obviously that's really helpful. But what about if I want to reach out to a member and speak to them, or a potential member and speak to them? What sort of content should I recommend to them? What sort of things should I be talking about? This is the sort of data that has really helped our customers take it beyond Google Analytics.
Great question, Evan. Just be ready in case I put you on the spot again. So. Okay.
Helpful, thank you. So Jeff, we've got another question around NLP. Can you share a little bit about that, and maybe for those that are on the webinar today that want a little bit of background?
Yeah, sure. I'm gonna give it, and then I might actually give it to Sebastian again to help. So the system utilizes natural language processing, so the analytics of HTML as text in order to call out and identify key topics. So that proprietary kind of background in technology is what the whole system is based on. This tool actually started as an analytics tool before it started to do other things like recommendations and so on. And so it's been based on NLP from the start. And as it gets smarter, as its ability to read more and more topics, it's going to provide more value to our customers. It does back up to kind of a system of record that we link it to. And in this case, again, it's Wikipedia to try to find topics that it recommends. But its ability to auto tag content in a way that I think a lot of customers struggle to do, and creating that relevance either for practical purposes or for analytic purposes is the key. And we really found that NLP was the path in order to do so. So automatic looking at content to see. Sebastian, anything you want to add there?
Yeah, hopefully you can hear me again. The thing I would say here about the NLP is that we're looking at unstructured data here. So it's easy when you have structured data of things that are easy to categorize and number and so on. When we're looking at text, it's really hard to deal with because there's so much different context you can have around the written word. So there's a couple of things that are really important to natural language processing. The first one of which is how much data do you actually have to train that natural language processing engine with. And the beauty of this is we've been doing this for a long time, and our system has seen billions upon billions of articles. And so the great thing here is that you have a very smart machine that really does understand the relationships between the words. And then the next thing that you really want is to then be able to for that system to be able to put it into a structure that you can use. And that's where the topic scoring that Jeff, you spoke to around, for example, where a word appears within the actual piece of text, if it's in the header, if it's in the footer, if it appears a lot of times, then that's the next thing you want to understand is like how important is this particular topic to the piece overall. And then the third one I should have mentioned is you then also need the system to understand the relationship between words. And again, Jeff, you sort of spoke around that. We used Wikipedia, Investopedia, but also different sites to help us disambiguate those phrases. So you gave the example of apple as a fruit is a great one. And you really do need to understand that to give back meaningful topics. So natural language processing, it's very smart, but all of these engines just come down to often how much training data you have. And this system's seen years and years of documents, and it really is billions of documents that it's read through now.
Great. We've got two final questions, Jeff, and I think that'll take us right to our time limit. So the second to last question, if you could talk a little bit about first-party intent versus third-party intent.
First-party intent data rather than third-party intent data. Gosh, wish I had a little bit more context here to the question. First-party intent by the user is the actions that they're taking on the site. So if it's, the pages that they look at, that would be kind of first-party intent as they look through it. Third-party intent might be the aggregation of the whole and trying to come up with trends and examples. When I'm doing analytics on the person, I'm looking at the words that they're looking at. So I'm trying to compare their words to other words in first-party intent. If I'm getting to third-party intent, then I'm trying to do the wisdom of the cloud, trying to draw those together. But the value here is that at the time that I look at a user, we are creating a word cloud for that individual and comparing that word cloud to the rest of the aggregate data. So we are getting to a first-party intent level action because the way that we record and the way that we're passing the data back. I hope I grabbed that question properly.
So Jeff, do you mind if I jump in on that one?
Of course, go ahead.
Cool. So one of the things I'd say here is there's a couple of different services out there where you can essentially buy some sort of topical level interest data, but from other people's websites. And then that's your third party intent data where there's some level of topical extraction from content people have been consuming on other sites, other publisher sites. The downside to that is it's usually anonymized, so you don't know to the individual level. And usually there's not that many topics. So it's usually quite limited, so not very granular. And the third downside to that is everyone has access to that service. Right, so essentially you get nothing different than if I rock up and pay my dollars, I get exactly the same data. The beauty of first party data and first party intent data is you are generating the value from your own content. This is information and data that nobody else in the market has. So when you're investing in creating that content and creating that experience, you're actually also getting this extra value back of insight that nobody else can claim, no one else can look at. And so this is one of the big reasons that people have been moving from relying on third-party sources to trying to generate the first-party content, is it actually starts to create a level of differentiation because it's data no one else has access to.
Great point.
Thank you. And we've got one last question, so the timing's going to work out great. The last question brings us to our last talking point, which is, how do I get a hold of this? So Jeff, if you want to throw up our last PowerPoint slide, my email is there. Huge thanks to Jeff and Sebastian. Epi has allowed Brightfind to share this tool with clients and friends of Brightfind absolutely free for 90 days. So you have the opportunity to reach out to me. My email address is there. We're also going to be sending this information out at the end of the presentation. So if you're interested in trying out the tool, no strings attached, please reach out to me and we'll help you get signed up for that. In addition to the free offer of actually having access to the tool, using the tool, collecting that content analysis data, you'll also have the opportunity to sit down with the team and have a bit of a training, a workshop to really understand what this data looks like that's coming in and how you can use it. Also at no charge. And then no strings attached. So at the end of the 90 days, if this is something that works for you, you're interested in purchasing the tool, fabulous, we'll get you set up and running. If you're not, if it's something that you think, hey, maybe we're focused on other things right now, we need to push it off, no strings attached. So it's really a no-brainer from our perspective, because worst case scenario, you get 90 days of free data about how your constituents are engaging with your topics. So again, Jeff, thank you for taking the time to meet with us today and share the product. Sebastian, thank you for joining us as well. Anything else anybody needs to add?
No, I'll say as part of the trial, it's really beneficial to use your data. It's not generic training or kind of a PDF that you get about how to use it. We'll actually do a workshop with your particular context so that you're seeing your data in action. And so even if you take the free trial and you learn a few things about yourself you didn't before, then you're better off than when you started. And with the level of effort that we see customers do, which is minimal at best, there's a lot of quick value. So hoping to hear from you all.
Sure. Absolutely. We will send this out shortly. If you have any other questions that come up or come to mind for you after we disconnect the webinar today, please also feel free to shoot those to my email. We'll make sure we get those answered to you, and we look forward to connecting soon. Thanks so much for your time, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.